Why is no one talking about South Africa? It was once the beacon of hope for an entire continent. Yet today, it hangs on the edge of disaster. The nation's power grid has been crippled, leaving its citizens suffering in darkness for hours on end. Corruption has penetrated every corner of South African society, leading to record unemployment, failing schools, and a healthcare crisis. And a foreboding adversary is rising to challenge South Africa's top spot in the order of sub-Saharan nations. This unfolding catastrophe clearly refutes the hopeful predictions made by outsiders who ignore the harsh realities on the ground. The stakes could not be higher for both the South Africans facing this crisis and the global community that relies upon the region for key minerals and resources. The future of this nation holds significant implications for the economic and geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. At the heart of South Africa's multifaceted crisis lies a power grid on the verge of collapse. Eskom, the state-owned utility company responsible for keeping the nation's lights on, finds itself drowning in debt while trying to unwind decades of mismanagement. As a result, the grid consistently experiences load shedding, another term for rolling blackouts. This is caused by a severe shortfall in the capacity of South Africa's power grid. Eskom has said that they need as much as an additional 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts to end load shedding. That means they would need to add the equivalent of 5 nuclear power plants or 10 coal-powered plants to meet the current shortfall. In the meantime, blackouts have become an all-too-familiar feature of South African life. Businesses grind to a halt, productivity drops, and daily routines are disrupted as random blackouts hit the country. It's tempting to hope that green energy will solve these problems, imagining a future where the sun and wind provide endless power. However, renewable energy sources are far from reliable and can't contribute the required baseline continuous power needs of a healthy, functioning country. There is an urgent need to stabilize the power grid and stop the frequent blackouts, but unfortunately, the government's response has been slow and inadequate. Instead of directly confronting the deep issues with Eskom, policymakers have chosen small, ineffective changes and continue to pitch green energy as a cure-all. The impact of this power crisis is far beyond the inconvenience of a few darkened homes and idle factories. It strikes at the core of South Africa's economic vitality, deterring foreign investment and stifling the entrepreneurial spirit. Multinational corporations, once eager to establish a foothold in Africa's most industrialized economy, now cast a wary eye. The small and medium-sized enterprises that form the backbone of South Africa's economy find themselves particularly vulnerable. Their thin margins are put at odds with unpredictable losses in power. And the burden of these rolling blackouts also falls disproportionately on the shoulders of the poor and marginalized, while the wealthy install backup generators powered by diesel and propane. In this context, the failings of Eskom become more than just technical glitches. They're a damning indictment of a political establishment that has lost touch with the struggles of the people that it serves. The power crisis can only be resolved in one of two paths: either the collapse of South African civil society or the catalyst for a long overdue reckoning. If that reckoning is to occur, it must start with the embedded corruption of the power company and the politicians who control its funding. The tumor of bad leadership has spread far beyond just the power company in South Africa. An IMF study estimates that corruption costs South Africa over $3.2 billion annually, equivalent to 10% of the nation's GDP. Those tentacles of corruption extend to every level of the government. One of the worst examples was when former President Jacob Zuma's government got caught in a far-reaching state capture scandal. Brothers Ajay, Atul, and Rajesh Gupta immigrated to South Africa from India in the 1990s and built a business empire spanning media, mining, and technology. They developed a close relationship with Jacob Zuma, who served as South Africa's president from 2009 to 2018. Allegations emerged that the Guptas used their connections to Zuma to influence cabinet appointments, secure lucrative government contracts, and gain access to sensitive state information. They were accused of offering cabinet positions to politicians who would serve their interests, and of pressuring officials to direct state business to Gupta-owned companies. One of the most notorious incidents involves allegations that in 2013, the Guptas used their influence to land a private plane full of wedding guests at a high-security military base, bypassing normal security procedures. The scandal also implicated several high-ranking politicians and officials. The former deputy finance minister claims he was offered a bribe by the Guptas to take over as finance minister and advance their agenda. This is yet another reason that foreign investment into South Africa is dropping. According to the World Bank, South Africa's foreign direct investment dropped in 2022 to just $9 billion. The year before, FDI was nearly $40 billion. But it's not just the central government. The Auditor General of South Africa found that 98% of municipalities failed to receive clean audits. This crime translates into crumbling roads, understaffed hospitals, and closed down schools, a betrayal of this nation's post-apartheid generation. The healthcare sector, a bedrock of any functioning society, has been hit particularly hard. Their suffering compounded by the frequent shortages of essential medicines and equipment. South Africa also sits at the bottom rung of countries in failing schools. One study found that 81% of South Africa's grade 4 learners were unable to read for meaning. The culture of corruption extends to ghost teachers who draw salaries but never set foot in a classroom, siphoning precious resources away from the students who need them most. Meanwhile, credit rating agencies Moody's and Fitch have downgraded South Africa's sovereign debt to junk status, making it harder to finance the projects it needs to turn things around. People are clearly fed up with the government, evidenced by declining voter turnout rates and the rise of populist movements that can tap into their frustration. Lack of trust in the institutions of governance poses an existential risk to South African democracy as the social contract between the state and its citizens breaks. And corruption isn't just a government problem. Big companies like Steinhoff and Tongaat Hulett have also been caught lying about their finances. Their accounting scandals have caused the stock market to lose billions. The greed of corrupt politicians and business folks doesn't just stop the economy from growing. It also makes the gap between the rich and poor in South Africa even wider. All of this has set the stage for South Africa to lose its position of preeminence on the continent. Africa is the most difficult continent on which to build a civilization. Its abundance of jungles, mountains, swamps, and deserts make development challenging. But it's Africa's plateaus that make you rip your hair out. As a result, none of sub-Saharan Africa's rivers are navigable, while its few rail lines are aging and primarily aimed at extracting specific commodities in remote locations. South Africa and Angola are the two slight exceptions to Africa's geographic challenges. South Africa sits outside the tropical zone, meaning that its population deals with far fewer disease exposures. That means it has enough people to fund infrastructure and use an indigenous skill base to build it for themselves. South Africa's global leadership in mining gold, diamonds, and platinum also helps a lot. South Africa's big chunk of highland doesn't stop at its borders. It extends north as a spine along the middle of the continent. The South Africans have constructed roads and rails along the spine to extract its key resources to the only sizable port in the region, located in South Africa. This allows them to tap a nearly bottomless source of cheap labor while utterly dominating economic development through Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and southern Congo. For decades, if you wanted to transport anything in bulk, bauxite, wheat, copper, you had to move it through South Africa. The only nation capable of disrupting this network of trade is Angola. Angola is one of the only other African nations with a non-tropical climate, allowing it similar developmental gains. As a bonus, it can fund itself through offshore oil income. The nation has spent 3 decades in a brutal civil war that left more than 800,000 dead and created 8 million refugees. But the dominant ethnicity, the Mbundu, have since emerged victorious and consolidated their power. During the Civil War, thousands of South Africans were deployed to Angola to participate. But now, the Mbundu are ready to turn the tides. They're using their oil income to fund an infrastructure buildup for the first time in modern history, which will play a crucial role in Angola's economic development. The build-out includes a container port at Lobito with handling capacity for 3.7 million tons per year, and the Benguela Railway, which connects the port into the African interior. This logistics network will siphon traffic that South Africa has controlled for the past century, ending their chokehold on the region's economy. Copper-rich countries like the DRC and Zambia are already sending their mineral exports, which will be crucial for a green revolution, to the West Coast. It's going to be up to South Africa to respond. They're poorly positioned to do so. South Africa used to have a highly capable special forces that it would deploy throughout the southern portion of the continent. With the end of apartheid, however, the military fell apart. It would take a dedicated, multi-year effort to regenerate the country's expeditionary forces. Even maintenance of the infrastructure that South Africa built years ago is falling back to more typical African standards. The Mbundu, meanwhile, remain completely capable militarily. They've used their military might to install friendly governments in Namibia and bombings in Zambia to warn off potential foes. And South Africa might not even have the energy to put up a fight anymore. In addition to their economic issues and failures of the power grid, the population is also fighting an increasing blight of disease. Some 80% of South Africans carry tuberculosis, while 30% of pregnant women are HIV positive. This has gutted South Africa's skilled labor and tax intakes, preventing the government from maintaining its apartheid-era levels of growth, security, and infrastructure. In contrast, Angola has largely escaped the ravages of HIV, leaving it with one of the healthiest demographics of any African nation. Their star is rising, while the South African one is falling. This is a bleak picture. So imagine that a world-class leader was elected to run South Africa. What would they even do? For starters, they would need to get the power back on. In the medium term, that means building power plants. If you can get IMF funding for solar or wind, then sure, do that. But coal plants can be fired up in 2 to 3 years under ideal circumstances. Nuclear plants take a little longer, but South Africa needs it all. Consistent power shouldn't just be for the wealthy. Planning for blackouts burdens local businesses with extra costs that make them uncompetitive. To fix this in the short term, they could rent power generation from elsewhere. Here's how that would work. Hire a floating power plant, like the Turkish company Car Power Ship, that uses natural gas to generate electricity. One ship connects to the grid and accepts deliveries of LNG that it turns into power for the grid. Companies already won a bid to provide 1,220 megawatts to South Africa. But it's facing pushback due to natural gas not being green enough and the increasing prices of LNG. But we need to ask, how much is it costing the South African economy to deal with these rolling blackouts? All those backup generators, the diesel and the propane that's being burnt isn't exactly clean. What about the businesses that have been shuttered because they can't afford backup power? What about the people that they could be employing? South Africa's official unemployment rate surged to a record high of 32% in 2024. That's 7.2 million people who are out of work. But it might actually be a low estimate. When discouraged job seekers, those who have given up the hope of finding employment, are factored in, the rate balloons to 43%. Solve the economic issues, stamp out corruption, and then the issues with crime and healthcare will be resolved shortly afterwards. That's basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs stuff. Then you can project power into the region and secure those mining assets. You can properly outfit your military and provide basic welfare to your people. But that needs to be structured and needs-based, not a byproduct of power and corruption. I sincerely hope that South Africa finds its way out of this mess, but I am not optimistic. Let me know if you agree in the comments. Their biggest trading partner, China, is in some hot water as well. We made a video breaking down the Chinese economy that you can watch next.